birlikte. if you stand me. Shimmy out, shimmy yeah. Bump it and grind, let's go the way. Shimmy out, shimmy yeah. Drinks in the air now, let this moment. Shimmy out, shimmy yeah. Tropical vibes are taking over.
Thank you, Vesna, again for this beautiful intro that we had the privilege to see just the participants here in Bled. It's always difficult to start after this really, really energizing intros, but this one was so energizing that I think that there is a lot of positive energy in this room now. So Ellen Shirley is going to give us the last keynote that we have in this course. And this is, why do we find it so difficult to be leaders and so hard to teach leadership? Usually when a keynote starts with such question, we end up in just negating what the question is actually implying. So I'm sure this is going to happen today as well. Please, Ellen.
Yes, so how to follow that? A PowerPoint presentation seems a very poor follow-up to what you've just seen, but I'm going to do my best. And I'm going to do exactly what Vesna says, because I'm actually going to answer the question on the first slide. Because one of the things about going last on this course is that lots of things have already happened. So I've actually changed the presentation every day so far on the basis of both the keynotes and the group work and the panel yesterday. So I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable here, following Vesna, but also that some of this is I've changed in the the last minute, so it's fine. I'm just sharing that with you. So the question I originally thought was these two questions really: why do we find it difficult to be leaders, and why do we find it hard to teach it? And I think we've actually already answered those questions. If I can get the pointer to work. Okay. And I think the actual evidence of the course so far, from what people have said, is that actually you don't find it difficult to be leaders. You're all leaders and you're doing it. So it might be that other people are finding it difficult and we need to think how to teach them. And how to teach it, well, that's the purpose of the course, and we're already learning that. So I'm going to do a bit more about that. So I've thought to slightly change the focus, and I think there's three things I want to cover. And one is I want to introduce you to, you're going to say yet another leadership model, but I found this one particularly helpful and particularly aligned to our values. So one of the things I was going to do was I was going to say, well, what do you imagine to be a great GP? And then what do you imagine to be a great leader? And I would have thought those two things would have been mismatched. But I think we've already learned, and that might have been what happened if we'd done it at the beginning of day one. But I think we've already learned so far, and Igor's mentioned it, and Jona's mentioned it, and Eva's touched on, Eva touched on it too, that actually the values are aligned. And as Igor said, actually, as family doctors, we may be better placed than other doctors to become leaders. So this is a quote that in the past jobs were about muscles, now they're about brains, but in the future they'll be about hearts. That doesn't mean that cardiologists are going to be all the leaders. It means that it's about our emotions. It's about our emotional intelligence, and it's interesting. So this person who said this, you might think this is a soft and fluffy person. So this is Manoush Shafiq, and she's got an honour from the UK government. But she was the youngest vice president of the World Bank, and she's worked for the IMF and all those other major international financial institutions, and she's now the director of the London School of Economics. So I think that's a good example of some of the things we've already heard, that things that we might think are soft and fluffy are actually at the core of modern best practice in leadership. So this is one of my source materials, really, this book, and actually this is Michael West, who Eva quoted. A couple of the papers she quoted yesterday were by Michael West. And he's a psychologist who's done a lot of work on healthcare leadership. And he's described healthcare, what he calls compassionate leadership, and he's written this book specifically for the British NHS, but it applies to healthcare worldwide. And there's actually a movement in compassionate leadership. There's a big literature on it. There's a Centre for Compassionate Leadership based in New York who run international courses. In fact, one of my leadership fellows has just signed up for their online international course. So if you might be interested in that, if you ask me in a couple of months, I can tell you whether it's any good or not. And so he's taken the concept of compassion, which he's split into attending, understanding, empathizing, and helping, and he's applied that to leadership. And I guess this is mostly, but not entirely, about the leadership of people and the leadership of teams. So he talks about the attending as really listening, and listening as being a key task of leadership. And before we might stereotypically think of leadership as telling and talking, but he's saying that we really need to listen and listen attentively, and as we do with patients, listen with fascination. So again, the analogy is, as family doctors, this is our core business, isn't it? But actually it's core business for leaders too. So the second one is understanding, and this involves, the intellectual skills of analysing and understanding through dialogue, the listening, and then having the dialogue, but also as, again, a theme that we've had of that reconciling of different perspectives and different opinions. So the other book I read was, and it's interesting, isn't it, that Nellie used various if you like, best-selling non-fiction books, and this is a best-selling non-fiction book, and a lot of you may have heard of Brené Brown and perhaps seen her TED Talk. I think it's one of the her TED Talk on vulnerability and shame is one of the most watched TED Talks. So she's actually moved into leadership work and has done leadership work with lots of big corporations, and the US military, a lot, interestingly. And again, the problem now is I can't remember who said what, but I think it was Mike mentioned someone from the military working as your practice manager, and that actually one of the things she talks about in the book is going to the military and talking to them about belonging and empathizing and understanding, and thinking they're all going to go, whoa, soft stuff, go away, when in fact they said, yeah, that's what we do. You have to feel that, and even talking about needing to love the people they're in their unit, because you need to have that level of trust and belonging to work as an effective military unit. So what I found in her book is she doesn't use the word compassionate leadership, but she's describing a lot of the same things. But what I think her skill is to turn them into pithy quotes and aphorisms, which have a lot behind them. But so one of the things she talked about understanding was about the difference between being a knower and being right, the traditional leadership, but being a learner and getting it right. So learning and listening and understanding, and then being able to get it right. And this is a paraphrasing of something other people have said, which is that perhaps as great leaders we think we need to give the answers, but actually what we need is great questions. So not just to ask questions, but ask great questions that get to the answers. So then empathizing is this we understand, again, as family doctors, understanding the distress, not being overwhelmed by it, and being understanding the sources and the context. Where has it come from? And then, again, this is a Brené Brown quote, and I thought this was really interesting. So leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behaviour. And again, that's a theme has come up a couple of times, is the amount of time spent talking to try and solve problems with people who we perceive as difficult. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on. And then helping. So this is about thoughtful and intelligent action, and he splits it into scope. So that's the breadth of what you offer. So you've got a range of things to offer, resources to offer people. The scale, how much there is of those resources, doing it in a timely fashion, but also specialisation. So what he means by that is that the help has to be specialised. It has to be right for the person that needs the help. And I guess this is about supporting and enabling rather than instructing and controlling. So again, it's bringing out the best in people and helping them to find the solutions, but giving them the resources to do it. So one of the things Brené Brown talks about is modelling vulnerability and actually being able to say, I need help, I don't know, help me. And this quote is actually from a qualitative study of looking at GP trainees, residents, developing leadership. And they were looking at, they were really looking at the hidden curriculum. They were looking at how they developed. And this quote came from that, and what they noticed was that actually from the interviews, it was clear that trainees were learning when their role model, their trainer, had shown vulnerability, hadn't known what to do, and shown themselves to be fallible, and actually that was a learning moment for them. So again, that idea that we have to have the answers, we have to know what to do, but actually that's really helpful. So what it's not, so I guess one of the things is you might hear compassionate leadership and you might think, well, that's all very nice and it's cosy. And what he says it's not. And we still need to commit to purpose and high performance, and actually managing performance and trying to do better is really important. And it doesn't mean we don't have tough conversations. And actually there's a big focus on tough conversations, and I'm going to come to that later. And it doesn't mean we can't challenge the status quo, and it doesn't mean that systems are going to be controlled by the person that's most ruthless. If we as the compassionate leader are kind, does that mean that someone else is going to come into that space and take over? And it's not just about individuals, it's about the system as well. Okay, and he talks about compassion enabling innovation. This is one of the pictures from yesterday, and it's called Dreams, which is why I chose that one. And this is some of the things we talked about, inspiring that vision and strategy, but also having clear and aligned goals at all levels. And that's a real challenge, isn't it, when our health systems or our governments are giving us multiple targets and multiple goals. It's how you distribute that downwards in a way that isn't overwhelming. And we need to include people and get them to participate. Get our teams to be enthusiastic and work with other organisations. And certainly, I don't know what's happened in Slovenia or other countries, but certainly during COVID, there was a lot of quite unexpected collaboration between organisations that would normally struggle to talk, work together, and might be mutually, to have a degree of suspicion of each other even. And it's creating that environment of having support and autonomy for staff to be able to innovate. So if you remember, this one was all about the countries and the diversity. And one of the statements in his book is that if it's not inclusive, it's not compassionate. And that really we need diversity, and diversity in the broadest sense here. So we are talking about diversity in terms of social determinants of gender and race and sexual orientation. But we're also talking about diversity of thought, diversity of ages, diversity of disciplines. And the more we bring in that diversity, we'll have more ideas and different perspectives. So one of the other things, and again, I put this in and took it out and I've put it back in. And the reason is that I think a lot of the conversations in our small group certainly were about taking on too much, we're feeling overwhelmed, we're taking on other people's jobs. I think the idea of leadership, self-compassion, and one of the things Michael West says is that our relationship with ourselves is the basis of our relationship with everybody else, and that we need to start with us. And I realise there's been some possibly contradictory messages about that, aren't there? We've talked about leaders needing to go in first and be eating last and all those sorts of things. But also we need to look after ourselves and not burn out. The leaders need to do that. So that means attending to and again, using the four aspects of the compassion of attending to ourselves, understanding our challenges, caring for ourselves and helping and supporting ourselves. And actually, if we can't do that, then how are we going to do that for other people? And he's got a nice acronym for this, which is RAIN, which Mike reminded me of on the first night we arrived, and I popped back into the presentation. And this is a mindfulness type practice really for attending to what's going on. Yeah, so it's thinking about as we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling under huge pressure, that we take the time and we recognise that, and we recognise that emotion, and we sit with it. You know, we allow and accept it, and we notice what it's about. And that we, you know, inquire it not in the sense of analysis, but inquire in the sense of, well, what does it mean and where does that come from? Where's that feeling come from? And then to nurture and self-soothe ourselves and say, actually, you know, I'm okay. I'm doing okay here. So, and many of you will have things like that you do already. But that self-compassion, that self-nurturing is such an important part of getting through. So the other idea is if we're going to have this environment where we want people to be able to talk and share, and we can make the team contribute, that we need psychological safety. And again, I thought before doing this, well, I think I know what that means. It's a phrase, and it's obvious. That's what we need. But what does it actually mean? So this is from, and I've managed to forget their name, the person who did the original work on psychological safety. And it's the idea that that it's safe to speak. You're not going to be punished for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. You know, it's not going to be shame and blame. And it's that the team shares that belief. Yeah. And that either the leader or other people in the team are not going to shame them and embarrass them. And it allows people to be comfortable, allows them to be open, and they can, you know, in the phrase, bring their whole selves to work. They're not dividing up they're not playing a different part at work, and they're bringing their commitment and their life experiences all together. And they talk about the 4 levels of that, where inclusion is simply being there and being accepted at a very basic level. Learning is that you can learn and grow. You can ask questions, give and receive feedback. Contributory means that you're safe to make a difference. You can use your skills to make a contribution. And challenger is when you feel safe to be able to challenge the leader and challenge the status quo. So how can we do that? How can we actually do that practically? So this is a simple checklist. I guess one thing is to actually make it explicit, talk about it and say, this is what we want to do. So that's relatively easy, and I've certainly been in environments where people said that, and then the reality. So one of the things about this sort of stuff is people say it, don't they? They say it's psychologically safe, you can say what you like, and then actually what happens is you say what you like, and then the old stuff happens, doesn't it? You're named and shamed, or you find people are talking behind your back, etc., etc. So we need to make it possible for people to speak up. We need to establish norms in the team about how we handle failure. And again, one of the features that's come several times has been that idea of it being okay to fail, and we have to pick ourselves up and learn from it. But actually, again, historically in medicine and society, that's not generally been tolerated that well. And we need to create a space where new ideas can be introduced. And finally, you know, this thing about conflict. How do we deal with conflict? Can we deal with differences in a way that is psychologically safe and enables us to continue to work together in an effective way? It sounds easy, but it's actually really hard. Okay, so the next section I'm going to talk about is having challenging conversations. So if you've got swords in your hands, it's definitely going to be a bit challenging, isn't it? And, you know, this is really, really hard. I mean, you know, having the difficult conversation with a colleague, whether they're a peer or senior or junior, is really, really hard, isn't it? And if I reflect on my career, I can think of two very significant occasions. One where I didn't have the conversation that I needed to have, or I had a conversation, I accepted things at face value and went away, and things didn't go well. And the second time where I was able to have a productive conversation with a colleague who I was really very concerned about what they were doing, and we had a very productive conversation and actually had a positive outcome. But the temptation is to just avoid that, isn't it? The temptation is to let it roll, work around people, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. And one of the things that is important, one of the important things is having the background already. So if your culture is you only go and talk to people when you've got something bad to talk about, then it's not going to work even if you do everything right. So that culture where, and we've talked about, Igor talked about it, other people have talked about it, of praising. You know, just when people have done a good job, noticing it and saying it. And having those relationships, not being the manager who only comes in when there's a problem, having those regular conversations with people. And people talk about the problem of nice. The problem of nice is oh, we're all nice here, and it looks superficially nice, but actually what happens is people are just not being honest with each other. They're being polite, and they're saying happy birthday on birthdays, and they don't disagree in meetings, but actually underneath, everyone's unhappy. Lots of people are unhappy with what's going on. They're talking to each other at the virtual water cooler, you know, the WhatsApp group that the manager's not on, or and actually there's lots and lots of hidden unhappiness. And I guess it's this thing about you know, giving difficult feedback and having those conversations. Is we think, well, I don't want to do that because I'm kind, yeah. But this is but actually, kind and honest are not mutually incompatible. And actually, the kind thing is to tell people, isn't it, and deal with it. And there's another Brené Brown one: is clear is kind, and unclear is unkind. And I mean, I guess my thoughts about that is I'm actually thinking about in terms of conversations I've had with trainees who are struggling, they're looking like they're going to fail, and I think about how I used to have those conversations and how I now have those conversations. And I had some feedback about that early in my teaching career. And I was, in an effort to be kind, I don't think I was really explaining properly what the problem was. So people were going away knowing that they weren't getting it right, but I wasn't really telling them what it was they weren't getting right and how they could get it right. And in an effort to be kind, I was actually being unclear, and that didn't work. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk, in order to think about how we have those difficult conversations, is talk about power and rank. And this is from the work of a North American psychotherapist called Arnold Mindell, who did work in the 70s and 80s, which has been picked up more by social movements and activism. But I was taught it by a friend and colleague, Edmund Cross, who does a lot of facilitation work, and we've had him doing some of our leadership development work on our leadership development program. So this is the idea about how we have power and rank in our lives. So we get it really from two places. So first of all, we may have the power from our job title. So you may have the job title of head of department or director of the healthcare centre, and that gives you situational power. But we also have other forms of power, and I think, was it Alexander mentioned that when we were standing on outside the castle? He mentioned social power. So social power, it gives us rank in places and in society. And the first thing is the global rank, and this is the social power that are derived from who we are, really. So, you know, I'm an old white man. So that gives me power in society. Yeah, we might not like that, but that's how most societies work, and we need to recognise that. And we may want to change society, but that's how society works. And generally that's static, it's how we were born, we can't change it. But that doesn't always apply, does it? There are situations, so despite global rank, Barack Obama can become president of the United States. Some black women are CEOs of major companies, not very many. So it's how the world works, but it's not the only way the world works. And so Mindell's looked at the other aspects of it. So one is that's the global rank. The local rank is the environment we're in now. So if we think, so that may depend, and that may shift depending on where we are, the room we're in, the norms and values of the group that we're in at that time. And that might be seniority, position, it might be popularity, the in-group, the out-group in work. So people may have power in a workplace because they're part of a clique that are the in-group. So if we think about Igor Svab walking into this room yesterday, so he's an older white man, but also, and he's wearing a suit, but also in this room, he's the dean of the local medical school, and he has status because of that position, but he also has status because people respect him and have known him for many years and all the things that he's done. So he brings different forms of power into the room. So the second part of power is the personal power, and for me this is the most useful part of the model, because these are the things that we can change. And these are the things that people have used to overcome the barriers of social power. And they're psychological and spiritual. And I guess the psychological is our life experience, our insight into ourselves, our emotional intelligence. And the spiritual power is the deep inside. So it might come from organised religion, but it doesn't need to. And it's that vision, that purpose, my self-knowledge, those sorts of things, that inner strength. And if we think about how people have overcome social power, if we think of, say, I don't know, Martin Luther King. So he had low social power. He was a black African-American in the era of segregation. He had some social power in his own community. He was educated, he was a minister, so he wasn't without social power, but in the wider society he had very little. But he drew on his psychological power and his spiritual power to lead and make massive changes. Yeah. And I'm sure you can think of lots of other examples of leaders who've done that. I'm not saying we all need to be like Martin Luther King, but it's to illustrate that we can use these things to overcome some of the others. And these are the things we can draw on. And that may be important when we're thinking about how we are acting as leaders. And we may feel unsure. We may feel we have low rank. We may be taking on a leadership role when we think. So one of the barriers in our group yesterday was too young. So we may feel, well, we haven't got that social power because I'm too young. But actually, I've got the skills and I've got the psychological power and I know my vision, I know my purpose here. So that can give me the strength to do that. So it helps us think about how we might overcome some of those barriers. Okay, I'm going to just stick with. And I guess the other thing about that is, in terms of the challenging conversations, is thinking about how those things are operating in a difficult conversation. Now we have, in consultations with patients, for most of the time, our social power as the doctor in that interaction, in that room, is going to give us the rank and power. There may be exceptions, but on the whole it's going to do that. I would suggest that in conversations with colleagues, a lot of that's not going to be there. And a lot of these things may come into play in those difficult conversations with colleagues. And of course, when we're feeling okay with the rank and the power, and the point is, rank and power isn't bad, it's how we use it, isn't it? It's how we use it and what purpose we put it to. But when we feel it, when we've got it, then we're going to be cool and calm and collected and deal with the situation. And when we feel we haven't got the rank and power and we're feeling we've got low rank and we're in a weaker position, then that's when we're going to feel the adrenaline's going to start to go, we're going to have freeze, flight or fight, and that's going to disrupt our ability to have an effective conversation. So I think it's a useful tool to think about when we're having difficult conversations, as well as for other things. Michael West's suggestion to challenging conversations is to think positively, which is a pretty hard place to start when you're actually having these sort of conversations. Stay present and calm. Plan and understand the other person's perspective. And if I think about the second conversation that I had that was more effective, one of the things was I actually had a series of conversations with this person before, almost sort of coffee type conversations, to find out what was going on in their life and what was happening, but because I realised that I hadn't really talked to them very much over the preceding months. So I actually did that before I had the conversation that I knew was going to be difficult. So I think I understood their perspective better than I had. And be compassionate, and again, one of the things that happens, I think, with challenging conversations, especially if we leave them, we start to demonise the other person, and we start to think they're bad, they're morally bad, and they shouldn't be doing it, and they've got a narcissistic personality, etc., etc. And sometimes that might be true. But the reality is most people working in healthcare come to work because they want to do the best job they can. And that's usually true of the people that we're finding difficult too. It's just something else, something isn't working. Give space for listening and reflecting, and that reflecting might be to stop the meeting and say, we're not going to carry on any further. We need to both take some time to think about this and come back to it. Because rarely will this sort of conversation be time dependent in the terms of we have to close the issue today. And obviously, in these sorts of things, you need to document them too, because things may go further. So the group work that I've set is to think about that and try that. So the next thing I want to quote Theodore Roosevelt. It's a bit of a long quote, so I'm going to have to turn around and read it fully. And the reason I put this up is because, and again, I don't know about the other groups, but in our group we were talking about the problem of criticism and the problem of what Brené Brown's called the people carping from the cheap seats, and moaning, but not being willing to actually step up. So it's not the critic who counts, and it's from 1910, so I apologise for the gendered language. You can blame Teddy Roosevelt, not me. Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But the person who actually does strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. So I don't know if that helps. You can think of the people carping from the sidelines as the cold and timid souls. But again, it's setting the bar high, isn't it? And other people have shared their leadership journeys, and I'm not going to share all of mine, but one of the things that I've reflected on is that I've made the decision to stop at a certain point in organisations 3 times. That I got to a certain point, and one of the things that happens as you get a little bit older, people start to tap you on the shoulder, don't they, and say, would you do this? Would you apply for this? And again, people have talked about that. And I think we need to really be careful about the tap on the shoulder, because the tap on the shoulder often comes from an old white man to another old white man. Yeah, we tap the shoulders of people who look like us and who we think will be like us. So we need to be very careful. And perhaps one of the things we can do to address diversity is to tap different people on the shoulder. But I've said, actually, a bit of self-compassion, a bit of knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. Actually, I'm going to stick here. So that's okay too. Yeah. So the last section, I'm going to talk about what might work and what perhaps we should do. So I've gone and had a look at the literature, and I tried to find, I looked for systematic reviews of leadership development or leadership education for undergraduate and postgraduates generally, and specifically family medicine. So I'm not going to put them all up. I'm going to just summarise just really briefly what I found. And there were several reviews. It's interesting that some people thought this was an area suitable for a scoping review, and some thought there was enough to do a systematic review, which perhaps in itself suggests that people aren't a bit unclear about what's out there. There wasn't actually a great deal for medical students. There were I think 4 reviews in the last 2 years, specifically looking at residency, and one specifically looking at family medicine. And they're all as usual when you look at this stuff, they're all looking at the same few papers. They all start with 284 and end up with 13, and they usually end up with the same 13. About half of them are from family medicine. And the general comments were the quality was mediocre, the theoretical constructs weren't very strong, and they mostly weren't mapped to competency models. Some of them had been, now again I'm forgetting who showed the UK Leadership Academy. Jonah, thank you. So some of them used that, and that seemed to be, so if people wanted a framework, that seemed to be one that people thought was useful, having looked at other ones as well. I've not looked at them all, but that was the researchers' conclusions. So I think there was some utility, and I'm going to share it, but I think the other thing is there's a lot of activity in this area, and it's not being researched. So I guess if you're thinking about an area you might want to go in, I think this would be a productive area to look at. But yeah, there's lots of activity which is not going to be captured in the formal peer-reviewed literature. So what works? So some of them looked at whether you should bring in external faculty or whether you should do it yourself. And the conclusion was that actually you shouldn't just outsource a leadership program to another organisation. You should either do it yourself or use mixed faculty, so bring in some expertise from outside. There was one example from US Medical School where they'd actually done a collaboration with the business school at the same university. And you know, perhaps you won't be surprised. You know, this is, you know, you read this and think, well, that's what I would have thought before I looked at it. Small group work, action learning sets, mentoring or coaching, an opportunity for reflection, doing something. So doing something and reflecting on it seemed to be, unsurprisingly, to be the most powerful bit. And not forgetting the hidden curriculum, always, that people are learning this. And I wonder how much we've used or captured the learning that students and trainees had during the pandemic, because I wonder if they saw leadership in action more than in normal times, because they'll have seen people, you know, running around and changing what was happening, and they'll be told, you know, I guess especially trainees, today you're doing this, tomorrow you're doing that. So they'll have seen change happening in a way that they might not normally. So. Okay, so what about what suggestions might I give you from what I've read? So this is moving into opinion from the research, so you're welcome to reject it. So leadership training for students, might that be understanding for followership? Now again, I've forgotten Tango. Who spoke about? Yes. Do you want to just tell us what you said? Have we got a microphone? Anna?
Well, I try to be short, but when you dance tango, you have to feel each other, and the follower needs to understand what the leader is asking the follower to do by his body. So actually, in the training of dancing tango, it is a great part of it if you take the time for a follower to experience leadership. So actually, I, as a follower, had to lead my partner so that I could understand the effort he gives into the dance and into the relationship in the dance, so that next time that I was back in my follower role, I actually could react better, and the dance was far more passionate and truly what it was meant to be, because I had the experience what he's actually doing to me, and I was better understanding because I had the experience of leading.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Also, shows the example of the conversations you have at events. So that made me think that in order to be a follower, you need to understand a bit about leadership. So for students, and Neela mentioned yesterday some of the things she's doing, and I think this is some of it. So having some theory, and perhaps the areas are communicating, teamwork. Interprofessional education is an opportunity to think about that. And again, the example that medical students tend to take the lead, and that in itself is an area for reflection. And perhaps some quality improvement activity and looking at, and that's about the process of change rather than the gathering of data. And I'm sure you have lots of other ideas as well. And I guess the next thing is, if we're thinking about residency and trainees in the future, I guess there are two areas. So one is the element of us all being leaders, and as an article talking about leadership with a small L. And that was the suggestion that we should think of our daily work as seeing patients, but also that actually noticing what's happening and what's not working and thinking about how to improve things should also be part of our routine daily work. And I guess in the best cultures, that's what's happening. And if we created the right culture, the compassionate culture, and the psychological safety, then people can say, well, I've noticed this isn't. And then actually, you can help them to do that, to think about the solutions, or it may be something that somebody else has to do. But it's creating those micro, if you like, micro leadership. But we also need people who are going to be the systems leaders of the future. And by systems leaders, I mean leadership roles as head of departments and head of health centres, etc., etc. So we need to think about both of those things. So I think perhaps then what we need is we need to think about all residents and trainees need something. And perhaps what they need is the theory as well, but they need to do something, and they need to do something more substantial than we might get students to do, and need the opportunity to feedback and reflect on it. And an example of what's happened, and of course we know why people learn. They learn because of assessment, don't they? Assessment drives learning. So actually, interestingly, last year, the year before? Last year, the Royal College changed some of the workplace-based assessment that UK GP trainees have to do to include a leadership activity. So they've got two things. They've got a quality improvement project, which is perhaps unsurprising, but it obviously includes an element of leadership. But in the final year, they have to do a specific leadership activity. It's not particularly huge. It could be chairing a meeting. It could be having another view of a practice system. It could be a quality improvement activity. It could be something related to patient groups. It could be something they choose. Not a large thing, but then they have to do a multi-source feedback, a 360-degree feedback. Earlier in their training, they have to do one on their clinical and professional skills. This one is specifically on their leadership skills. So it gives them an opportunity to do an activity, get some feedback, not just from their supervisor, but from other people, and then to reflect on it. So it's new. I'm sure there are lots of other ways of doing that. I'm not sure how it would pan out. Whether the risk of these things is to become a tick box, don't they? That people do in an authentic way to meet a requirement. But I think it's an interesting opportunity. And then we need to think about how do we train aspiring systems leaders. Because we need to build the capacity to replace us, don't we? And I remember Igor saying that you need to start that at the beginning. I think it was Igor. Somebody said, you need to start that when you start the job. You need to be already thinking about succession. If you leave it till when you retire, it's too late. And you can't think of one person to succeed you, you need lots. So we need to do that as individuals, but we need to do that as systems too. And I think, so I've been running a small program for this for 2 years now. So this is perhaps a little bit more robust because it's based on the research. It's also based on my experience of doing it. And we very much found that the small group activity with them doing project work, we had a small group of 5. What was really strong about that was they became a team and they actually helped each other. So they worked on a variety. It was 12 months. They were doing 4 half days a week, so 2 days. And what they did is they worked on overlapping projects. So 2 of them would work on one thing and a different 2 would work on something else, and 3 of them worked. So they were actually learning from each other, doing overlapping activities, and then coming back to our group and learning. And they all had the opportunity for one-to-one coaching from a qualified coach. And looking at that, the programs in the literature, some of those looked similar to that. So again, examples of what's happening, again, just because it's the experience I have, what's happening in the UK is there is funding for trainees during their 3-year GP training to take a year out and do a year of leadership, a year leadership fellowship by competitive application, supported project work, and the access is slightly different to what I'm describing. The one I'm describing is for after training, and there's a number of places for that across the country. They then go that and finish their clinical training, and then hopefully think about those things later on. Then there are programs for post-training, which actually Mike's involved in running as well, which are taking GPs within 5 years of qualifying from their GP training, and having 2, sometimes topped up to more sessions, as we did as well, for time to learn about leadership and involve in those activities, and they're usually for 12 months. So hopefully they're producing people who may go off in lots of different directions, but have developed a number of things in terms of their own leadership skills, understanding of the system, and may go straight on to other, or may return to purely clinical work for a while, and then I guess the idea will be they then pop up later, and we keep an eye on them. And certainly the cohort effect of a group of people who then also support each other. And I know that our first cohort have gone to do lots of different things from it, and they're still in close contact. I guess the other question, thinking about multi-professional, we're again focusing on doctors. Are doctors going to be the only leaders of healthcare teams? Our doctors aren't already the only leaders of healthcare teams, and we need to think about that, and should we be expanding it? So our programme has expanded to include other professions, and we have a nurse and a physiotherapist on our programme this year. So we use #work together, #learn together, #lead together. So a bit cheesy, I know, but Okay, and this is my last slide. So one of the things is create the environment where people can do it. Let people produce their ideas. And I can think of at least one example where I had an idea and I mentioned it to a few people, and then it came back around and everyone said that's great, and I kept my mouth shut because I knew if I said it might spoil the effect and it might not happen, and just let it happen and have the inner, have that inner power, psychological power. Okay, I know that was me. It doesn't matter that no one else notices. And actually, in reality, usually somebody important has noticed that it was you, even if it's not publicly acknowledged. So, that's it.
Thank you.
I know that I have to use this microphone.
It's on.
I think it's on. Yes. So, thank you, Alan. I really went so deep into your lecture, so I almost forget that I have some task to do this morning. Sorry for that. But I was really impressed how elegantly you used these pictures and art, and then made these photos and combined with this lecture, which is really new for us. But making link between what we already experienced and this new knowledge, and closing the learning cycle here. So thank you very much. So time for the discussion. Yes, Vesna, please.
We already
Okay, we already have questions that came up during your lecture online. And the first one was that when you said that COVID actually brought some organizations closer or together because there was like the common goal.
Yeah.
And then one of the persons in the chat was wondering how we bring this kind of cooperations to a sustainability as soon as the COVID-19 is accepted as a new normality. Yeah.
So the disadvantage of that being an online question is if you were in the room, I'd say, "How do you think?" That would happen. I think
you can still do that, but it's going to be a time lag.
There'll be a time lag. I don't know the answer. Is the short answer.
Yeah.
The longer answer is perhaps people have formed relationships that they wouldn't have other formed, and they've developed trust, and perhaps we can build on that. We can build on the relationships that have been built, and perhaps we can then start to use those for better purposes. I mean, is that an experience other people have found? Yes. That people, yeah. And it would be a huge shame to lose that, wouldn't it? But I can only think it must be the relationships that people build if we continue those relationships, that we can look at other things that we can do.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so true. Then another issue that really raised a lot of interest was the rules for challenging conversations. Yes. Marta actually suggested that they seem to relate to the structured feedback technique, doesn't it?
Yeah. And again, I think we have those skills. Yeah. And so I think the point I was making was that perhaps the context is different and perhaps more challenging. But yeah, I think the concepts are very similar. We can directly transferable from teaching.
And the rest are well done, and thank you.
Okay.
So, yeah, please.
Thanks. Hi, Alan. I was kind of thinking about the slide you had about how we assess students when we're teaching them about leadership. And it was really interesting, and it's kind of got me thinking about, well, you can assess knowledge through written tests or written assessments, but my question is the real impact of leadership is the impact it has on other people. So almost that the whether you're doing it well or not has to come from the population or your teams. It can't be an individual-based assessment. What do you think about that?
I completely agree, and I think that's interesting why the Royal College have put the multi-source feedback bit into that. And I think it's that challenge that you were describing in yesterday's panel about getting authentic feedback. And I don't know other people's experience, but my attempts to get authentic feedback in leadership roles has been woeful, and I've almost pleaded with people, don't just tell me that I'm doing okay. I need to know where I'm not doing okay. And it's I've not been very successful in getting that out of people. I know I didn't mention it actually because I think you need an NHS email address to do it, but the NHS Leadership Academy, who produce the framework, you can do an online self-assessment to the framework, and then you can do a multi-source feedback to your colleagues, who then give you feedback on which you have to pay for, to give you feedback on those domains, so you can compare your self-rating in those leadership domains to. So that is perhaps a method. But yeah, I think it's very difficult. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I agree, it is difficult. And I think what I've noticed sometimes is that the people giving the feedback don't necessarily recognize how important it is.
Yeah.
So it's trying to lift the priority of giving that feedback and understanding how it can lead to better situations for themselves in the future.
Yeah.
But I accept it's incredibly difficult because you're relying on multiple people.
Yeah. Perhaps the other thing is building the culture where we can say it to each other without filling out an online form, but we can actually have the conversation. And perhaps we need to seek critical friends, who are going to be honest with us. So someone mentioned, people know Joe Buchanan, don't you? So Joe Buchanan was my line manager for a while, and Joe, I think, now, so, is a very nice person, but if you're not doing it right, she'll tell you in a very appropriate way, but she's clear. And when that happened, I knew that I needed to, and I wasn't upset with her, I wasn't cross with her, I still thought she was a really nice person. But and I think that's actually quite a rare skill to do that, and I think that's a real skill we need to develop. So we need to see. But yeah, sorry, I'm rambling now.
Yeah, maybe I was thinking while listening to this conversation, I thought, maybe it's also the problem that people are afraid to give the criticism because they're afraid how you're going to accept it.
Yes.
So it's maybe not really always the problem with the people who who are afraid to give the honest criticism, but the perception how you are going to accept it. I think it's about the same with the children. They lie to you because they're afraid how you are going to accept the truth.
Yes.
So I think it has to be in both directions.
Yeah.
You have to be clear if you're really, because you can say I can accept the criticism, but they may not really feel it's okay to say it to say it out loudly.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely right, Vesna, and it's the psychological safety subject. We can say, it's okay, you can tell me what you want, but actually, if you tell me the truth, then actually I'm going to get really upset, I'm going to get really cross, or I might fire you. So, that's not going to help. So I guess the only way we can do that is to say it, but do it, and repeatedly do it, and show it that we're doing, and build a culture where that is how we do it here. And that process may be hard, and I'm not pretending that I've succeeded greatly in doing that in the small teams I've run. But
May I make a practical suggestion? We all have a golden opportunity to practice this in the next, or in the two small group sessions. At the end of the final small group session, before we go back to the plenum and say goodbye, I always ask for feedback because it's easier to do in the intimacy of our small groups. And true feedback is a gift, and I've been given a gift every time I come here. And I say, please honestly tell me, when you lead this group, when you go home, what will you do differently from what I did? And I learned so much from that, and that's really fun. And it's not hurtful, it's not hateful, it's permitted. And that's why I keep coming back, because I learn so much every time I teach and get honest feedback.
Yeah, I will. Nella, please. I know that we have almost to finish, yes, but the microphone is you because you are the president and you use the social.
you have the rank and power.
Yeah. I hope that's not the reason that I get the mic. I also wanted to say, so I have a question also later on, but I also wanted to say that for my team, when you do formal conversations once, twice a year, and you use some questions like, indeed, what do you like to do in a different way in our team, then sometimes feedback is coming up, and it's also, or you can think of the relationship with your attitude or your behavior. But my question is about the teaching leadership. So what I'm intrigued by is the fact that you call it, so we talked about yesterday about the followership, and now you use also the micro leadership. So I'm thinking, maybe, because when you want to work with students about leadership, it's such a big word, and how they are going to cope with that, and what is their willingness to learn it. But maybe if we use those words more, micro leadership and followership, then it's maybe more doable or copeable for them. What do you think about that, Alan?
I mean, that was the idea. I just be careful. Micro leadership I made up yesterday, so I don't think it has a robust evidence base.
No, but we can use it from now on. It can be a concept that is born now, and maybe we can try to use it.
I think you're right. There's the risk that it becomes a big, huge thing, and it is only about being the boss, and it's not about the rest of it.
No.
So we probably need both those. That's why I was suggesting we need both those elements.
Yeah,
so, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I really thank you, Alan, and I close now this conversation, and it's time to go to the small group works, and we have plenty time to discuss all those burning things which raised up, but we didn't have answer yet, and to prepare in the next workshop or the small group for the presentation. So have a nice rest day. But Vesna, probably you have some closing remarks? No, it's okay. Yeah, thank you.